And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome aboard. I'm National Weather Service meteorologist Peter Chan with your Alaska Marine Weather Outlook on this Tuesday, December 17th, 2024. And looking at the sea ice, we've still had easterly winds that have been rather brisk here across areas of the west coast, and those are going to continue. We have some blowing snow still expected through at least about midnight here along especially the northern areas of the Seward Peninsula from Buckland to Deering, especially Shishmaref, where visibilities could be as low as a half mile at times, and a little bit of light snow and then blowing snow as easterly winds could gust to 35 miles an hour. We do find a few polynyas here opening on the areas west of Utqiagvik, Wainwright, and Point Lay. We still have some openings in the ice, though they filled here more so in the lower portion of the Chukchi Sea, and then as we get south of the Bering Strait, still some open water, especially there north of St. Lawrence Island. And even though the trend as we head toward and through Christmas is that temperatures in this region will likely average a bit below normal, so this should facilitate some better ice development. We're not anticipating any big surges of mild air and temperatures above freezing again coming up into this area of the state or Chukchi Sea anytime soon. So I expect the ice development to continue there. And we should also see a little bit more outside of Norton Sound and along the lower Yukon Delta, though areas along Bristol Bay, Kuskokwim Bay, lost and melted off ice, and then we're going to have some pretty brisk winds the next couple of days, gale force winds that will make the ice development certainly slower, and temperatures are not that cold. We're looking at daytime highs still around or just above the freezing mark. So late tonight into Wednesday morning, we have low pressure coming out of the North Pacific toward Dixon Entrance. This is going to produce accumulating snow over the southern panhandle. Winter weather advisory for this Tuesday evening through Wednesday afternoon. That includes Prince of Wales Island and Metlakatla and Ketchikan. Hyder, these areas could pick up 3 to 7 inches of snow tonight through Wednesday afternoon, and maybe even a little bit of a light mix of some freezing rain. Further west, pretty strong low, 948 low coming out of the North Pacific up across the eastern Aleutians. This front has a pretty packed pressure gradient. That is why there is a high wind warning for the lower portion of the Alaska Peninsula for later this Tuesday evening through Wednesday morning. Winds could gust as high as 70 to 80 miles an hour, especially along the higher terrain and through the gaps around False Pass, Cold Bay. So that'll be the main weather impact with this front before it begins to weaken later on Wednesday. And then after the initial low pushes inland, the one that comes up through Dixon Entrance, there's another low down in the North Pacific that'll be lifting up toward the Gulf for the weekend, which will just bring enhanced precipitation and wind along the entire Gulf Coast into the Panhandle again here for Friday into the early weekend. And then this double barrel low pressure system just going to kind of pinwheel over the Aleutians lower Bering over the next couple of days. Meanwhile, high pressure ridge nudging into the central interior will keep skies there mostly clear to partly cloudy with some colder temperatures, certainly sub-zero. On Thursday, here comes that next low that'll be lifting northward up toward the Gulf to round out the week, and then we have a couple of lows extending back there just north of the Aleutian chain in the lower Bering back toward the far west. So the marine forecast for Wednesday, we have still some areas of snow, maybe even a light mix of a little freezing rain or sleet here, southern parts of the Panhandle. Winds will be north-northeast around 20 knots. Further north winds, Lynn Canal. Waves 5 to 7 feet in inner channels. For the outer coast, winds turn more easterly. Sitka up to outside of Yakutat Bay at 15 to 20 knots. And then Thursday, winds actually will be stronger over the Gulf. We're looking at 30 to 35 knot winds south of Sitka. With waves running 15, 16 feet. Those winds become more easterly, anywhere from around 20 to 30 knots, with waves 14 to as high as 19 feet off of Cape Suckling. Inner channels will see a mix. North winds, Lynn Canal, 3-foot waves, 15-knot northeast winds, Stevens Passage, and then southeast winds to 25 knots coming up out of Dixon Entrance with waves 6 to 8 feet there, Ketchikan, Metlakatla. Along the northwestern Gulf, initially variable winds 10 to 15 knots, Prince William Sound and just outside Hinchinbrook entrance. As we drop down along lower Cook Inlet, 25 to 30 knot northeasterly winds, 5 to 8 foot waves, easterly winds 25 knots with 8 to 9 foot waves off of Kodiak City there. And then the winds really pick up Thursday because we have that low in the frontal system lifting north with a better wind field associated with that. So outside of Hinchinbrook entrance, easterly gales 35 knots, waves 15 to 19 feet. Northeast winds 20 knots with 4 foot waves within Prince William Sound, but more notably here, Kamishak Bay, Lower Cook Inlet, and outside of Kennedy entrance to just northeast of Kodiak Island, we're looking at east to northeast storm force winds of 50 to 55 knots with waves of 18 to 20 feet. Across Kodiak Island on Wednesday, easterly winds 30 knots, but as we go down the length of the Alaska Peninsula, look for east to southeast winds of 40 to 45 knot gales, gust as high as 55 knots there through Cold Bay. Waves running 13 to 17 feet on the North Pacific side and 7 to 8 feet on the Bering side. For Thursday, we're looking at winds within Shelikof Strait, 60 knots from the northeast, 17-foot waves. Easterly gales of 45 knots along the east side of Kodiak Island with 20-foot waves. And then northeast to east winds on the order around 30 knots as we extend down along the Alaska Peninsula, finally becoming more easterly at 20 knots, either side there at Cold Bay and False Pass. And across the Aleutians, that deep low will be lifting northward across the central Aleutians on Wednesday. So ahead of it, 40 knot southeasterly gales on Alaska, the far eastern Aleutians. Those winds turn back toward the north-northwest and then westerly with gale force 35 knots on the North Pacific side, Shemya, Kiska, west of Adak. And for Thursday, winds come down across the Aleutian chain. Southeast winds to 20 knots on Alaska, kind of variable southwest winds. Nikolsky through Atka, anywhere from 10 to 20 knots. And then as we get further west at Adak back towards Shemya, winds generally west-northwest at 20 to 25 knots. Pretty strong wind field here across the southeast portion of the Bering on Wednesday, 40 to 45 knot easterly gales, Bristol Bay, Kuskokwim Bay, and extending out to St. Matthew and the Pribilovs at St. Paul, 45 knot easterly gales, waves out that way 15 to 20 feet, brisk offshore flow, 25 to 30 knots out of Norton Sound and along the lower Yukon Delta, even though more favorable, the colder temperatures for some ice formation, that is going to push ice westward. And then across the entire area, winds essentially become northeasterly on Thursday, still offshore flow out of Bristol and Kuskokwim Bays at 30 knots, and then we're looking out of Norton Sound and along the lower Yukon Delta, generally northeast winds 25 knots, and then northeast to east gales of 35 knots from St. Matthew down to St. Paul and St. George with waves of 17 to 18 feet. And rather brisk winds will continue on Wednesday, lower Chukchi Sea, the Bering Strait, north side of St. Lawrence Island, easterly winds of 25 knots. There's a fair amount of ice trying to rebuild with colder temperatures, but there could still be some push westward with that ice as we get up along the Arctic coast. Still 35 knot gales in the vicinity of Kaktovik, so expect some blowing snow that way, though those easterly winds fall off to 20 knots as we get out there toward Utqiagvik and Wainwright. And then finally, Thursday, we still have 30 knot winds around Kaktovik, falling off to 10 knot east-northeast winds, Prudhoe Bay to Utqiagvik. And the winds become northerly over the Chukchi Sea, lighter west of Point Ley and Wainwright, only maybe around 5 to 10 knots, but they accelerate again through the Bering Strait to the north side of St. Lawrence Island. We're looking at northeasterly winds 25 to 30 knots. And again, there could be some push of the ice westward as a result of those winds.